He mocked his wife for having no lawyer until her vampire king father arrived and stunned the entire court. He stood there in his designer navy blue suit, laughing with his attorney as he gestured toward the empty seat beside his wife. Harris thought the divorce was already won. He thought freezing every account meant she had no way to fight back. He even joked to the judge, loud enough for the gallery to hear, that she couldn't afford a lawyer from a cereal box. But Harris made one fatal mistake. He never asked about the father Samantha spent 20 years running from. When those courtroom doors opened and he stepped through, Harris's smirk didn't just disappear. His lawyer's pen hit the floor. The bailiff's hand moved to his weapon. And every living thing in that room felt their blood turn cold. What Harris didn't know was that he hadn't just humiliated a woman. He declared war on a king. And what happened in the next 11 minutes didn't just end a marriage. It erased a man's entire existence. Before we continue, let us know in the comment section what time it is and where you are watching from. And remember to like and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of the story. Now, let's continue. It started small. A credit card declined at the grocery store. Samantha's name mysteriously removed from their joint account 3 days later. Harris explained it away with a concerned smile. Just consolidating finances. Babe, easier for tax season. She believed him, because that's what you do when you love someone. You trust them not to dismantle your life while kissing you goodnight. 6 months later, her phone stopped ringing. Old friends, college, co-workers from the nonprofit she used to volunteer at, even her favorite barista, who always saved her a corner table, they all went silent. Samantha didn't know that Harris had been making calls. Concerned calls. Worried calls about her mental health, her erratic behavior, how she'd been saying strange things lately. He never specified what things. He didn't have to. People filled in the blanks themselves, and the blanks always painted her as broken. Her mail stopped arriving too. Birthday cards from distant cousins. Bank statements. That letter from the estate attorney about her grandmother's jewelry collection. The one thing she had left from her human side. The one inheritance Harris couldn't touch. Except he could. He did. He intercepted the certified letter, forged her signature, and sold every piece to a private collector in Dubai. She wouldn't find out until the divorce filing. Buried in an asset disclosure he thought she'd never be able to challenge. By the time Harris announced he wanted out, Samantha had nothing. No money. No friends who'd take her calls. No proof of the jewelry that had been in her family for 4 generations. He'd engineered it perfectly, like an architect designing a building's collapse from the inside. Every beam weakened. Every support removed. And when he finally pulled the last pillar, he made sure to stand back and watch her crumble. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday. Harris had already moved out, taken the car she thought was hers, and left her in their apartment with exactly $14 in her purse and a notice that the rent was 3 months overdue. He'd stopped paying it in her name. She just didn't know. And when she showed up to court that morning, alone, with no attorney and no options, Harris leaned over to his lawyer and laughed. He actually laughed. Because to him, this wasn't a divorce. It was a victory lap. Courtroom 7B smelled like old wood and broken promises. The kind of place where lives got divided down to the last coffee maker and set of sheets. Samantha sat at the defendant's table, hands folded in her lap, back straight despite everything. She wore a burgundy dress she'd bought 3 years ago, back when Harris still pretended to care where they went for dinner. It was the only professional thing left in her closet that still fit. Stress had a way of reshaping a body, carving it down to something hollow. Across the aisle, Harris looked like he'd just stepped out of a magazine spread. Designer navy blue suit, silk tie, shoes so polished they caught the fluorescent lights overhead. His attorney, Julian Cross, sat beside him in an identical power pose. Legs crossed, leather portfolio open. Mont Blanc pen tapping against yellow legal paper like a metronome of impending victory. They whispered to each other occasionally, and every time they did, Harris would glance at Samantha and smile. Not a kind smile. The smile of a man watching an ant struggle under his shoe. Judge Patricia Brennan entered at 9:15, already annoyed. She was known for running a tight docket, no patience for delays or excuses. Her eyes swept the room and landed on Samantha's empty table. No attorney. No briefcase. No files. Ms. Walker, the judge said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Where is your legal representation? Samantha stood slowly. Her chair scraped against the tile floor, the sound too loud in the silence. I don't have an attorney, Your Honor. Judge Brennan's jaw tightened. This is a dissolution of marriage with contested assets. You were advised 4 weeks ago to secure counsel. I understand, Your Honor. I've been trying, but trying isn't good enough. The judge shuffled papers, irritation radiating off her like heat. Mr. Cross, does your client wish to proceed? Julian Cross stood, buttoning his suit jacket with theatrical precision. We do, Your Honor. My client has been more than patient. Ms. Walker has had ample time to prepare, and frankly, her lack of organization is not our concern. Harris leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. Then he raised his hand, like he was in grade school asking permission to speak. Judge Brennan sighed. Yes, Mr. Walker? Your Honor, I don't mean to be insensitive, Harris said, his voice dripping with fake concern, but maybe Ms. Walker could call 1-800, imaginary for her legal team? I mean, she keeps talking about all this support she has, all these people in her corner, but... He gestured broadly at the empty chairs around her. I'm just not seeing anyone. Laughter rippled through the gallery. Quiet, uncomfortable laughter, but laughter nonetheless. Julian Cross covered his mouth, shoulders shaking. Even the court reporter smirked. Samantha didn't flinch. She'd learned a long time ago how to turn herself to stone. How to let the words hit her and fall away like rain on marble. She kept her eyes forward, her breathing steady, even as her nails dug crescents into her palms. Judge Brennan banged her gavel once. Mr. Walker, that's enough. But Harris wasn't done. He leaned toward Julian and said, just loud enough for the room to hear. Told you. No family. No friends. No backbone. The judge opened her mouth to speak again, to demand Samantha either proceed or concede when the sound came. A low, heavy creak. The kind of sound old courtroom doors make when something forces them open. Not pushed. Forced. Every head turned, and Samantha's heart stopped. Because she knew that presence. She'd spent 20 years trying to forget it. The temperature dropped first. Not metaphorically. Literally. The kind of cold that crawls under your skin and wraps around your spine, the kind that makes your body remember it's made of meat and bone and fragile things. The fluorescent lights flickered once, twice, as if the building itself was holding its breath. He stepped through the doorway, and the world tilted. Roland Ramos didn't walk like other men. He moved like water over stone, each step deliberate, soundless despite the marble floors. Pale porcelain skin that seemed to glow under the harsh courtroom lighting. Platinum blonde hair looked both ancient and modern, like he'd stepped out of a Renaissance painting and decided contemporary fashion could bend to meet him halfway. He wore a black velvet blazer paired with charcoal slacks and boots that had seen more centuries than anyone in this room had seen years. But it wasn't the clothes. It wasn't even the face, though it was the kind of face sculptors spent lifetimes trying to capture and always failed. It was the eyes. Silver. Not gray. Not light blue. Silver, like polished coins dug from a grave, reflecting everything and revealing nothing. When those eyes swept across the courtroom, people stopped breathing. The bailiff's hand dropped to his service weapon, fingers trembling against the grip. He didn't draw it. Couldn't. Some primal part of his brain screamed that metal and bullets wouldn't matter against whatever this was. Harris's smile didn't just falter. It shattered. His mouth hung open, half-formed words dying on his tongue as every ounce of color drained from his face. He looked like a man who just realized the ground beneath him was never solid to begin with. Julian Cross's Mont Blanc pen slipped from his fingers and hit the floor with a sharp crack that echoed like a gunshot. He didn't reach for it. His eyes were locked on Roland, wide and unblinking, the way prey freezes when the predator finally shows itself. Judge Brennan's gavel hovered midair, her arms suspended in some forgotten motion. Her expression shifted through confusion, alarm, and then something worse, recognition. Not of Roland specifically, but of what he represented. She'd been on the bench for 23 years. She knew when power walked into her courtroom. Real power. The kind that didn't need to announce itself because every living thing could feel it pressing down like atmospheric pressure before a hurricane. The gallery went silent. Not the silence of respect, but the silence of terror. The kind of silence that happens when every nervous system in a room screams the same message. Don't move. Don't breathe. Don't let it notice you. Roland's gaze found Samantha. For just a moment, something flickered across that perfect, inhuman face.
Sorrow.
Regret.
Pride.
It was gone before anyone else could catch it. Then he turned those silver eyes on Harris, and his voice rolled through the courtroom like distant thunder. I believe, Roland said, each word perfectly enunciated, perfectly calm. You are looking for my daughter's legal representation. Harris's hand clutched the table. His knuckles went white. You found him. Samantha's chest tightened as Roland crossed the courtroom floor. 20 years. 20 years of silence, of distance, of building a life where no one knew her last name or what it meant. 20 years of pretending she was just another human trying to survive in a world that didn't believe in monsters. She'd been 17 when she left. Not a child by human standards, but practically an infant by immortal ones. Her father had ruled the vampire territories for over 6 centuries, his name whispered in fear and reverence across every shadowed corner of the world. And she'd been his only heir, his treasure, his impossible half-human daughter who would never fully belong to either world. Growing up in his court had been suffocating. Every success she achieved came with the same hollow praise. Of course, she won the negotiation. She's Roland's daughter. Naturally, she mastered 4 languages by age 12. Look who raised her. She brokered peace between the Western clans? Well, no one would dare disrespect the king's child. It didn't matter that she'd spent months preparing for those negotiations. Didn't matter that she'd studied until her eyes bled, that she'd trained with diplomats and warriors and scholars who didn't care whose blood ran in her veins. Every achievement was reduced to a single explanation: nepotism, protection, the invisible shield of her father's name doing all the work while she simply existed in its shadow. She'd never know if she was truly capable or just permanently sheltered. That question had eaten at her for years, gnawing through every accomplishment until it tasted like ash. When ambassadors bowed to her, was it respect or fear? When rivals backed down, was it her strategy or her surname? The doubt became unbearable, a weight pressing down until she couldn't breathe.
So she'd left.
Walked away from the immortal realm, from the title, from the power. She'd chosen the human world because here, no one cared about vampire royalty. Here, she could be nobody. Just Samantha. Just a woman trying to build something real with her own 2 hands. She'd gotten a job at a nonprofit, rented a tiny apartment with a broken heater, made friends who knew nothing about her past. And when she'd met Harris at a charity fundraiser, he'd seemed perfect.
Human.
Normal.
Safe.
He'd looked at her like she was special without knowing anything about what she came from. For the first time in her life, someone had chosen her for her, not for her father's legacy. Except Harris hadn't chosen her at all. He'd seen a woman alone, disconnected, vulnerable. He'd seen an easy target. And now Roland stood 10 feet away, his presence filling the courtroom like smoke, undoing 2 decades of distance in 11 seconds. Samantha wanted to scream at him to leave. Wanted to prove she could handle this herself, that she didn't need rescuing, that she was more than just the king's daughter waiting for daddy to fix her problems. But her bank account had $14. Her attorney chair sat empty, and Harris was still smiling like he'd already won. Samantha said nothing. She just sat there, drowning in the familiar, suffocating weight of her father's shadow, hating that she needed it and hating herself more for pushing it away. Roland set a single briefcase on Samantha's table. Soft Italian leather, no brand name, because when you've existed for 6 centuries, you don't need logos to prove quality. The clasps opened with a whisper-soft click. Judge Brennan cleared her throat, recovering some semblance of authority. And you are Roland Ramos. He didn't add a title.
Didn't need to.
Representing my daughter in this matter. I apologize for my tardiness, Your Honor. International obligations delayed me. Julian Cross shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Counsel can't simply appear without proper filing, without. Roland produced a document from his briefcase and slid it across the bench to the judge. His movements were economical, precise. I've held an active bar license in this state since 1987, Your Honor. I filed my notice of appearance electronically at 6:47 this morning. Everything is in order. Judge Brennan scanned the paperwork. Her eyebrows rose fractionally, but she nodded. Proceed. Harris leaned toward Julian and whispered something. Julian shook his head in response, but uncertainty had crept into his posture. The predatory confidence from earlier had evaporated. Roland turned to face the courtroom, his silver eyes settling on Harris like a scientist examining a specimen. Your Honor, my client's husband has engaged in systematic financial abuse spanning the entirety of their marriage. I have documentation. He placed the first folder on the table. Forensic accounting analysis conducted by Bergman and Associates, the firm that assisted the SEC in the Theranos investigation. Their report details Mr. Walker's systematic wage theft over a 32-month period. He altered my daughter's direct deposit to withhold her overtime pay, performance bonuses, and 2 salary increases, giving her only base wages while redirecting $127,000 to offshore holdings in the Cayman Islands. She was paid just enough to survive, but never enough to leave. Harris's face went from pale to gray. That's a lie. She never. Employment records, W-2 forms, and testimony from her former supervisor at Mercy General Hospital are included. Roland's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Each word landed with surgical precision. Ms. Hart has provided a notarized statement confirming my daughter's full compensation package and expressing confusion about why the additional payments never reached her account. Because Mr. Walker intercepted them. Julian frantically flipped through his own files, searching for something to contradict what he was hearing. He found nothing. Roland placed a second folder down. Additionally, Mr. Walker sold my daughter's inheritance from her late grandmother, Margaret Torres. 17 pieces of estate jewelry dating back 4 generations. Appraised value, $340,000. Sale price through black market dealer, $180,000, paid in cryptocurrency to untraceable wallets. He produced photographs. Each piece of jewelry documented, cataloged, traced. Receipts from the Dubai collector who'd purchased them. Transaction records showing the crypto transfers. Bank statements showing deposits into Harris's personal account exactly matching the conversion rate from Bitcoin on those dates. Mr. Walker forged my daughter's signature on the estate claim. Roland continued, sliding a notarized handwriting analysis across the table. She never received the certified letter from the probate attorney because Mr. Walker intercepted her mail. A federal offense. Harris's breathing quickened. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold that still permeated the room. There's more. Roland opened a third folder, this one thicker. Credit cards opened in my daughter's name, without her knowledge. 12 of them. Combined debt, $67,000, all now in collections, destroying her credit while Mr. Walker maintained a perfect score. I have the applications. The signatures don't match. Another federal offense. Judge Brennan leaned forward, her irritation now directed entirely at the plaintiff's table. Mr. Cross, did you know about any of this? Julian's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. Roland wasn't finished. The apartment Mr. Walker claims is jointly owned? Deed shows my daughter's name was removed 8 months ago through a quitclaim deed she never signed. Notary stamp was fraudulent. The notary in question died in 2019. He let that sink in. Used a dead person's credentials to steal a home. Harris gripped the table like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Shall I continue, Your Honor? Roland asked. I have 4 more folders. Judge Brennan set down the third folder, her expression carved from stone. Mr. Cross, these are serious allegations. Forgery, identity theft, fraud. Does your client wish to respond to any of this evidence before I make my findings? Julian's hand moved to Harris's arm. A warning grip, but Harris was already shaking his head violently. This is insane, Harris said, his voice climbing an octave. You're going to believe some stranger who walks in here with a bunch of papers? I'm the victim here. I've been supporting her for years. Roland tilted his head slightly, the gesture almost curious. Supporting her with her own money, Mr. Walker? She didn't have money. The words burst out of Harris, like a pressure valve releasing. His chair scraped backward as he stood, finger jabbing toward Samantha. When I met her, she was nobody, working some dead-end nonprofit job, living in a place with cockroaches, wearing the same 3 outfits on rotation. I gave her a life. I gave her a home, a car, decent clothes. Mr. Walker, sit down. Judge Brennan's voice cracked like a whip. But Harris was spiraling, the careful mask he'd worn for months cracking down the middle. You want to talk about theft? She stole 5 years of my life. I could have married someone worthwhile, someone with actual connections, actual value, but instead I got stuck with.
Sit down.
The judge stood now, gavel in hand. Harris ignored her, turning fully toward Samantha, his face flushed red. You think you would have survived without me? You think anyone else would have put up with your baggage? You should be grateful. I even looked at you twice. Julian had gone pale, half rising from his seat. Your Honor, my client is clearly emotional. If we could have a brief recess. She had nothing. Harris was shouting now, spittle flying. No family, no savings, nothing. I built her from the ground up, and this is how she repays me? By dragging me into court with lies and... Mr. Walker. Roland's voice cut through the tirade like a blade through silk.
Quiet.
Controlled. Lethal. You just stated on the record that my daughter had no savings when you met her. Harris blinked, chest heaving. And yet, Roland continued, pulling a single sheet from his briefcase. Her bank statements from that period show $89,000 in a personal savings account. Money she'd earned and saved over 4 years of work. Money that disappeared 6 months after your marriage. He slid the document toward the judge. Would you like to explain where that money went? Harris's mouth opened.
Closed.
His eyes darted to Julian, who now had his head in his hands. You said you gave her a car, Roland went on, his tone conversational, almost pleasant. But the title shows she purchased that vehicle herself 2 years before she met you. You simply had your name added to the registration later. That's not. I paid for the insurance. With the credit card you opened in her name, without her knowledge. The statements are in folder 4. Harris's breathing turned ragged. The gallery had gone dead silent, every eye locked on the implosion happening in real time. "You claimed she had nothing," Roland said, each word measured and deliberate. "But what you meant is that you systematically took everything until she had nothing left. Isn't that more accurate?" She was weak. Harris slammed his fist on the table, the sound echoing through the courtroom. She needed someone to take control, to make decisions, to steal from her. Roland's silver eyes didn't blink. To forge her signature. To isolate her from employment, friends, family. To intercept her mail and sell her dead grandmother's jewelry for gambling debts. "I don't have gambling debts." Folder 5 details $90,000 in losses at 3 separate casinos over 18 months. All funded by the cryptocurrency sales of your wife's inheritance. Harris froze. The color drained from his face all over again. Judge Brennan's knuckles were white around her gavel. "Mr. Cross, control your client, or I will have him removed." But Julian was already standing, briefcase in hand, his face a mask of barely contained panic. "Your Honor, I need to request an immediate sidebar." Denied. Judge Brennan's eyes were ice. "Mr. Walker, sit down and be silent, or you'll be held in contempt." Harris collapsed into his chair, hands covering his face. His shoulders shook. Whether from rage or fear, no one could tell. Roland placed folder 5 on the table. He didn't need to open it. The damage was already done. "Shall I continue?" he asked quietly. Julian Cross stood slowly, his expensive suit suddenly looking 2 sizes too large. His briefcase clicked shut with a finality that made Harris's head snap up. "Mr. Cross?" Harris's voice cracked. "What are you doing?" Julian didn't look at him. His eyes were fixed on Judge Brennan, his jaw tight. "Your Honor, I need to address the court." The judge's expression was unreadable. "Proceed." "Your Honor, I was retained by Mr. Walker 6 weeks ago to represent him in what I was told was a straightforward dissolution of marriage. Standard asset division, no children, no significant complications." Julian's knuckles were white against the table's edge. "What has been presented here today? The evidence of fraud, forgery, identity theft, and perjury was never disclosed to me during client intake or at any point during my representation." Harris grabbed Julian's sleeve. "What are you?" Julian jerked his arm away, taking a step back. "Don't touch me." The courtroom held its breath. "Your Honor," Julian continued, his voice steadier now, "Rule 1.16 of the Rules of Professional Conduct requires me to withdraw from representation when a client has used my services to perpetrate fraud or when continued representation would result in violation of ethical rules." He pulled a document from his briefcase, already prepared, already signed. "I am formally withdrawing as counsel for the plaintiff, effective immediately." Harris shot to his feet. "You can't do that. I'm paying you." "With what money, Mr. Walker?" Julian's composure finally cracked, his voice sharp. "With the funds you stole from your wife? With the cryptocurrency from her grandmother's jewelry? Because I guarantee you, every dollar you've paid me is now evidence in a federal investigation." The implications hung in the air like poison gas. Every transaction tainted. Every payment traceable. Judge Brennan accepted the withdrawal motion without comment, her face carved from granite. "Mr. Walker, you now have the option to represent yourself or request a continuance to find new counsel. Though I'll warn you, given what's been presented, finding an attorney willing to take this case will be difficult." Harris turned in a circle, looking for an exit that didn't exist. His eyes landed on Roland, who watched him with the detached interest of a cat observing a dying mouse. You can't just believe him." Harris pointed at Roland, his hand shaking. "He shows up with some papers, and you all act like they're authenticated financial records, forensic analyses, and notarized testimonies." Judge Brennan's voice could have frozen nitrogen. "Mr. Walker, every document presented has a case number, a witness signature, or a corporate seal. Mr. Ramos isn't asking me to take his word. He's showing me evidence that you signed a financial disclosure under penalty of perjury that omitted offshore accounts, hidden assets, and ongoing fraud. Julian was already at the courtroom doors, his briefcase clutched like a shield. He paused just long enough to look back at Harris one final time. Not with pity, with disgust. "You told me she had nothing," Julian said quietly. "You told me she abandoned her job, ruined her own credit, and that you were the reasonable party trying to move on." His throat worked. "I built a case on lies. I submitted documents I now know were falsified. You didn't just destroy your wife, Mr. Walker. You tried to destroy my career along with her." The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot. Harris stood alone at the plaintiff's table, his navy blue suit rumpled, his face the color of old paste. The gallery watched in absolute silence. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, her fingers frozen above the keys. Roland straightened a page in his folder, the gesture almost casual. "Your Honor, if we're ready to proceed, I have the federal warrants that were executed this morning on Mr. Walker's financial institutions. The U.S. Marshals are standing by outside." Harris's knees buckled. He caught himself on the table, gasping. "Marshals," he whispered. Roland's smile was colder than the grave. "Did you think this was just about a divorce?" The courtroom doors opened again, but this time there was no cold wind, no supernatural dread. Just the heavy, measured footsteps of 3 U.S. Marshals in tactical vests, their badges catching the fluorescent light like mirrors. The lead marshal, a woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, approached the bench with a leather folio. "Your Honor, we have federal arrest warrants for Harris Jonathan Walker." Judge Brennan accepted the documents, scanning them with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen this scene play out before, though perhaps never in a divorce proceeding. She nodded once. "Proceed." Harris backed away from the table, hands raised as if he could physically push away what was coming. Wait, there's been a mistake. I haven't been charged with anything. You can't just." "Mr. Harris Jonathan Walker," the lead marshal's voice cut through his protests like steel, "you are under arrest for violations of Title 18, United States Code, wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and mail fraud." "Mail fraud?" Harris's voice pitched higher. "I never." The second marshal, a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his jaw, stepped forward. "Theft from a deceased person's estate constitutes fraud under federal statute when you intercept official probate correspondence and forge signatures on legal documents. You stole $340,000 in assets using the U.S. mail system to facilitate the crime. Turn around, Mr. Walker." The lead marshal's hand moved to her cuffs. "Hands behind your back." Harris looked wildly around the courtroom, at the judge, who watched with cold satisfaction, at Samantha, who sat perfectly still, her face unreadable, at Roland, who had returned to his seat beside his daughter, his silver eyes tracking Harris's every movement like a wolf watching wounded prey. "Samantha." Harris's voice broke. "Samantha, please. Tell them this is crazy. We can work this out. I made mistakes, okay? I admit it. But we don't need to." "Mr. Walker, turn around." The marshal's voice hardened.
"Now."
Harris took another step back and hit the railing separating the gallery from the floor. Spectators recoiled. A woman in the third row pulled out her phone before remembering recording wasn't allowed and quickly lowered it. The scarred marshal moved behind Harris, while the lead marshal approached from the front, cutting off any escape route. Not that there was anywhere to run. The bailiff had moved to block the side exit, his hand resting on his own cuffs. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," the lead marshal said. Something in Harris finally broke. The fight drained out of him like air from a punctured tire. His shoulders sagged. His hands dropped to his sides. When the marshal turned him around and pulled his arms behind his back, He didn't resist. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the silent courtroom.
Once. Twice.
Harris Jonathan Walker, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The man who'd mocked his wife for having no lawyer was now being read his own rights while she sat with one of the most formidable advocates any of them had ever witnessed. The marshals led Harris toward the doors. His legs moved mechanically like a puppet with cut strings. As he passed Samantha's table, he tried one last time. "I loved you," he whispered. Samantha's eyes lifted to meet his. She'd been silent through the entire proceeding, through his breakdown, through Julian's abandonment, through everything. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, clear, and absolutely certain. "No, you didn't." The marshals pulled him forward. The doors swung open, and Harris Walker disappeared into the hallway beyond, surrounded by federal agents and the weight of his own crimes.
The doors closed.
The gallery erupted in whispers. Judge Brennan banged her gavel once. "Order." The room fell silent again. She turned to Samantha and Roland. "Ms. Walker, given the circumstances, I'm granting an immediate dissolution of marriage, full asset recovery pending federal investigation, and a permanent restraining order. You'll receive the written order within 48 hours. Samantha nodded, still not speaking. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell a final time. It was over. 6 months had a way of changing everything. The storefront on Maple Street had large windows that let in natural light, the kind that made the space feel open instead of institutional. A hand-painted sign above the door read, "New Moon Resources, Support for Survivors." Inside, 3 counselors worked with clients in private rooms while a small waiting area offered coffee, tissues, and the promise that someone would listen without judgment. Samantha stood at the front desk, reviewing intake forms, her blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore a burgundy blouse. She'd reclaimed the color after realizing Harris had tried to take that from her too, and a silver necklace that caught the afternoon sun. A half-moon pendant, delicate but unmistakable. One side polished bright, the other darkened with intentional tarnish. Light and shadow. Human and vampire. Both halves necessary to make the whole. The funding had come from 2 sources. The first was the asset recovery from Harris's criminal case. He'd been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, and every dollar he'd stolen had been traced, seized, and returned. The second source had surprised her. A trust fund established in her name 34 years ago, when she was 3 years old. Roland had set it up through a network of international banks, accessible only to her, untouchable by anyone else. The attached letter had been brief. "In case you ever needed it. I hoped you wouldn't. I'm glad it's there now that you do." She'd cried reading that letter. Not the bitter tears she'd shed during the marriage, but something else. Something that felt like relief.
The door chimed.
Samantha looked up and found her father standing in the entrance, looking almost comically out of place in his tailored black coat and silver-tipped boots. A few clients in the waiting area stared. One whispered to her friend. Roland had that effect on people, even those who had no idea what he was could sense that he was other. "Ready?" he asked. Samantha grabbed her jacket from the back of her chair. "Let me just tell Maria, I'm heading out." 5 minutes later, they were seated in a corner booth at the coffee shop 2 blocks down. It was a modest place, nothing fancy, the kind of spot where regulars knew each other's orders and the owner remembered your name. Roland looked faintly amused by the laminated menu, but he ordered black coffee without complaint. Samantha wrapped her hands around her own mug, vanilla latte, extra foam, and watched her father pretend to be human. He was good at it when he wanted to be. The small gestures, the way he held the cup, the slight nod to the server who refilled his water. "You've done well," Roland said finally, his silver eyes softer than she remembered. The organization. It's good work. It's needed work, Samantha corrected. There are too many people who end up where I was. Isolated. Afraid. Convinced they deserve it. Roland was silent for a moment. I wanted to come sooner. After you left. I know. But you needed space. You needed to know you could survive without me intervening. Samantha looked down at her latte. I almost didn't survive. But you did. Roland's voice was quiet, certain. You built the life. You chose your own path. Even when that path led you to someone who tried to destroy you, you found your way out. I didn't do that. You did. You helped. I showed up when you'd already decided to fight. Roland set his coffee down, his fingers tracing the rim of the cup. That's different than rescuing someone who doesn't want to be saved. You were never weak, Samantha. You were learning. There's a difference. Something in Samantha's chest loosened, a knot she'd been carrying for 20 years finally starting to unravel. I spent so long thinking I had to prove I didn't need you. That needing help meant I was just your shadow. You were never my shadow. Roland met her eyes. You are my daughter. Not my possession. Not my legacy. My daughter. And I failed you by not making that clear before you felt you had to run. Samantha blinked hard. She would not cry in this coffee shop. She wouldn't. I'm trying to do better, she said finally. To accept that I'm both things. Human and vampire. Independent and connected. Strong enough to stand alone and smart enough to know when I don't have to. Roland reached across the table. His hand hovered for a moment uncertain before Samantha placed hers in his. His skin was cool, ancient, and impossibly gentle. Then we'll both keep trying, he said. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the street in shades of amber and rose. Somewhere across town, Harris Walker sat in a cell, his empire of lies reduced to nothing. But here, in this small corner booth, a father and daughter sat together, not as king and subject, not as protector and protected, but as two people learning that love didn't require one person to disappear for the other to exist. Samantha touched her half-moon necklace and smiled. For the first time in years, she felt whole. If Samantha's journey from isolation to freedom touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe for more stories of courage and second chances. Share this with someone. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like this to life. Thank you for watching.